All right. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome everyone to the final discussion on the book, The Impossible State by Wael Hallaq. So today we will be discussing chapter 6 and chapter 7, the belligerent globalization and moral economy, and chapter 7, the central domain of the moral. It's a both are fairly short chapters, and I have to say, to be frank, it was quite disappointing. I had expectations, but disappointing. I mean, I shouldn't be disappointed that it was disappointing going from chapter 1 to chapter 5. There was a trajectory it was taking, but I had aspirations. I just hoped that he might actually have gone into the direction of, criticizing. He does cover it a fair bit in criticizing corporations and globalization, but just on the surface, just barely goes deeply into it, and then he concludes the chapter as I've summarized in the notes that I've provided. I know that we're not all in agreement on the book. Has anyone had a change of mind about the book discussion at this point, or do you feel that Hallaq is misunderstood?
My initial problems with Wael have not been countered by any of the subsequent chapters and any of his anything else that he's had to say in the book. In my opinion, this is he shouldn't have written this book. He should have written a book that was a critique of Western theories, governance theories or what have you, and just made it that, because the book is all about theory and not about real life. He doesn't provide any practical examples, neither from the current period nor in historical period, whether he's talking about the West or in Islamic civilization. So it's a theory book. It's a book that's relevant within the covers of the book itself, and he's just it's all theoretical, and which is fine. It's fine to have a book critiquing Western theories and Western philosophies and so forth, but putting it in the way that he put it, it seems to me that he seems to be trying to pretend that the book is relevant in some way in the real world, and I don't see that it is, and I don't see that it is accurate in most of what it says with regards to the Muslim world and theories of Islamic governance and fiqh and Sharia, uh, and as I said from the very beginning, I think that he's completely misassigning what is the source of the problem in the West, that it's not the system that was created by the kufr, but it's the kufr itself. And the kufr hasn't been imposed upon the society by the system, but the system was created by the kufr of the society. And that's the nature of the actual problem. And so I don't actually have much new to add from what I've said in the past. And we've had discussions, as you all know, in the discussion group, uh, particularly with Brother Fahim, who has gone to a lot of trouble to try to salvage Wael's thesis, in my opinion, unsuccessfully, because primarily, brother, I appreciate the effort, but primarily you have defended Wael by basically using Wael's own words, his own, just regurgitating his own thoughts, which doesn't solve the problem of the thoughts themselves. But so no, don't really wait for me to talk. I probably won't participate very much. I've said pretty much what I can say about this book, and I'll just add one thing, although I have commented on it before. When someone is uh, very unnecessarily using uh, overly complicated language, it usually is because they actually have very simple and simplistic ideas and simplistic theories, and I find that his theories are very simplistic, and he's trying to make them appear very complex and very deep and very meaningful by basically just running it through a thesaurus program to make it sound much more intellectual than it really is. I find that the actual intellectual level of this book, in my opinion, the actual intellectual level is quite low. The academic level is quite low. The vocabulary is very high, but unnecessarily so, which just to me is an indication that, as I said, that you're trying to make much more complex something that's very simple. So in my opinion, it's a book that needed to be addressed, and alhamdulillah, we're dealing with it and addressing it. Uh, and you know, it's been beneficial for that purpose. But in my opinion, uh, it's it's not contributing anything meaningful. I think that you can say that, like I said in the beginning of what I was talking about, I think that he has some value in his critique of the West, in his critique of Western theories. And it should have just been a book about that. It should have just been a book on critiquing Western theories, Foucault, whatever, postmodernism, and so on. That would be fine. Just make it that. Don't try and make it a comparison and contrast with Islamic governance and fiqh and Sharia and so forth, because it completely fails at that. And don't try to pretend that it's actually relevant in the real world, because what you're talking about is all theory. And there's a place for that, to debate and to critique theories. And if that's what you're doing, then that you should be clear that that's what you're doing. And don't make it seem as if this is in any way whatsoever uh, uh, connected to even the real world in the West, and certainly in the real world in the Muslim lands. So that's all I have to say. Jazakallah khair.
All right. Anybody else?
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum
I read every word of the book, including the introduction, and I greatly, greatly appreciated it and enjoyed it. It really cleared up for me the historical reasoning behind some of the things that I suffer living here in the West, as I have for all of my 66 years. And I used to wonder from whence came the mentality so prevalent amongst the officers of the state, and the historical significance of where this mentality came from is made very clear in this book. I did not find the language off-putting, because books of this nature that deal with historical philosophies of the construction of a particular paradigm tend to be linguistically dense affairs, which is why I tend to avoid them. So I feel very blessed that through this book club, I am essentially, if I want to remain a member, forced to engage with things which I might otherwise not have engaged with. But there was great clarity for me in the lifting of the philosophical constructs of the nation state, what is meant by the nation state, its foundation. And one of the things that recurrently occurred to me as I was reading this historical and philosophical background was the position of Usted, who says essentially things have natures, and how they are made, the fundamentals of that tends not to change much over time. And so in keeping that in mind, I began to understand why I, as a Muslima and a Black female, suffered so greatly and encountered so much hostility from agents of the state. I am not an aggressive, verbally or physically abusive person, and the level of violent hostility, not just intellectual or emotional, but actual physical violence that has been visited upon my person was just inexplicable to me. I couldn't understand why men would choose to behave in this manner against a person who represents absolutely no physical threat to them, made no such claim of any physical threat to them, and ended up having to be hospitalized for 12 days because they broke one of my bones in their attack on me. It was just a mystery to me. But this book showed the background, the foundational formulations behind the Euro-American nation-state project. And it was like clearing a veil for me so that I could clearly see why adult literate people would behave in this manner toward a good moral person who was simply trying to correct some wrongs being done. So it's been very beneficial to me. And I have no objection whatsoever to Professor Hallaq cursory discussions of the Islamic side of things. The book is a warning to us about the foundation of the Western nation state and the fact that no such geopolitical entity had ever existed in humanity prior to the founding of this. And so it was very, very good for me and where and how I live. And I don't think that people who do not live in the West would get as much benefit from it unless they read it as an attempt to explain, excuse me, as an attempt to explain the vagaries of Western law and political thought that, as we all know, just seesaw back and forth because they are not grounded in anything that is divine and therefore unchanging. So it was greatly beneficial to me.
Thanks, Sister Wahida. Maybe if I can draw your the participants' attention to chapter 6 of the book, where I detected a contradiction in where he identifies, I quote, okay, the heave and thrust of globalization. Okay, in the heave and thrust of globalization, he's saying that the state is losing its sovereignty. I thought he was onto something here. Okay, that the nation states are losing their sovereignty, meaning, are you going to go into the private monopoly of wealth by global corporate powers? Again, like I said, I'm disappointed he doesn't go in that direction. So while saying that the trajectory that globalization has taken on the world has minimized the sovereignty and the power of nation states, and then he goes on to talk about how the world economy is undoubtedly more intensively pursued and minimally regulated, having little resemblance to a system. So I don't know what he's trying to get at. He's also saying the and then he goes on to say that globalization has not significantly diminished the features of the nation state, as discussed in the previous chapters. So first you acknowledge, so I'm genuinely wondering if he's actually lucid when he's writing. Like, first of all, when talking about Muslim governance, he's insisting that we take this dichotomy of timeline. Okay, and he identifies, he's cut off the timeline from about 200 years ago, 1826 onwards. If you watched some of the interviews that I talked about, I've seen 2 interviews of him. In one of the interviews, that's the timeline he talks about. He doesn't refer to the timeline in the book, but he mentions 1200 years of Muslim governance. And then from after 1200 years, it just vanished. Okay, it's non-existent according to Hallaq's world. All right, I refuse to acknowledge that world that he's insisting upon his readers. But I just wanted to point out the contradiction in chapter 6. First he's seems to recognize the diminishing powers of nation states because of the overwhelming, presence of globalization, of private market, of corporations. And then he goes on to say that no, not really. Nation states, they still have the powers that I mentioned previously, despite the wielding power, he even thrust of globalization, as he talks about. Anyway, this is something that really irked me because, again, I had some hope in a direction that he was going to take, but he didn't. And then chapter 7 was even more annoying. The section on the pillars.
I did not find a contradiction. One would normally not expect a 200-year-old entrenched geopolitical system to simply fold at the appearance of globalization. I believe that his point was that there was some weakening of the Western nation states due to the nascent globalization, but one would not expect them to simply collapse because globalization is not yet fully realized. It's entrenched, but not yet fully realized. It's a relatively new phenomenon. And so I didn't find anything dichotomous in what he wrote. So it didn't upset me at all. I do agree with his premise about globalization, and I've always been opposed to it because I see it as a system that will eventually very negatively impact Muslims if we are sucked into it wholly and forced to adopt it. And as far as his statement about the 1200 years of Islamic rule, I believe he was using that time frame because he's looking at the foundation and propagation of the Enlightenment that took over the West in the last 200 years, which was also when they expanded globally and began so much colonization. So it's not that the Sharia disappeared, it's that we became colonized, and that had a negative effect on our abilities to continue unimpeded in our observance of our fundamental tenets. So I really didn't see that as something objectionable. I think when you are colonized, no matter how benign the particular colonization is, you are certainly going to lose some of your ability to continue to live unimpeded in your own religion and culture. There will certainly be some constraints.
I'm sorry, I hate to interrupt, but when you talk about colonization is not a recent, 200 years ago, yes, but we were also colonized, attacked by the Mongols, by the Crusaders. I mean, this is not a new phenomenon by a foreign entity trying to take over Muslim lands, trying to take over Muslim control over territories. It's not a recent thing. I mean, this is what I mean. If you're unfamiliar, if it takes someone who's totally removed from any sort of familiarity with history, with Muslim history, in order for you to go along with Hallaq's
I really disagree, sister.
Because if you look at Muawiyah, okay, he established a bureaucracy. He established military control. He established financial control. He established religious authority. He established cultural and linguistic policies. I mean, there's things that he's established. I mean, this is Muawiyah. We're talking about Muawiyah. We're talking about way back, like 1,000 years ago. And you need to be, because according to Wael's world, this never existed in Muslim governance, and he has not provided any evidence of that.
I just don't see how you can arrive at that conclusion. What Hallaq is discussing is what took place after the Enlightenment with our contact with colonizers who came under the structure, the geopolitical structure of the Enlightenment. He's not talking about pre-Enlightenment times. The Enlightenment caused a certain kind of
Yes.
nation state formation. So he's just cursorily dealing with a little of our contact with that. This is a very brief book. It is not meant to be the be all and end all of a look at all of the attempts to colonize Muslims or all of the wars fought against us or that we fought against others. He's looking at a very constrained point in history that has to do with Western people's abandonment of any kind of divine order and setting up a system in which the God besides God is the nation state and its effects on the people in the West and some of its effects on those of us who were colonized under this system. But it's primarily a book about the setting up of the Western nation state and how it was essentially just an overhang of the previous theological setup, sans any information or belief in God, thus making the nation state solely a God besides God, because the highest level of law in the nation state is itself. There is no divine law. I remembered what Usted said about they do not change.
Right.
They don't change. And I just said, well, yeah, this is showing me historically that they have not changed. So I just didn't read it. I'm a Westerner and I read it from a different perspective than you read it from, Salma, because I live in this mess and I've always lived in this mess. And I've always, from the time I was a child, suffered greatly in this mess. So this was helpful to me in naming, the people whose philosophies helped to set this up. And it helped me understand why people like me suffer so greatly under this system. And I already knew that the Islamic system was superior. And I understood why, having suffered the vagaries of law changes during my 66 years, it's just been a sea change, a back and forth of laws without explanation that made any sense to me. And so I found this as a Muslima who is a woolly-haired Black woman living in America for 66 years very beneficial.
As I said, it has a value in terms of being a critique of Western philosophies and Western theories and Western ideas of governance. But really, he's out of his element when he's talking about Islam and Islamic history and Islamic government. And again, my problem with it is he's attributing to the system what isn't the system's problem, what isn't the system's flaw. The problem that everything that you're talking about, Sister Wahida, that you've suffered isn't because of the system. It's because of kuffar. It's because of kufr. And they created a system that's almost identical. I mean, as much as they want to pretend that it's different, it's not different. It's the same. Like I said, and I've been saying, and as you have noted, they haven't changed. So I don't see why it's necessary, except as a means of deflection from the real source of the problem. Why it's necessary to attribute all of these the ills of the West, the immorality of the West. You're going to blame the system. It's not the system, because there's so many elements. There are so many elements in what he calls the nation state. So many so many elements and so many factors that he attributes to the nation state that are available in the Muslim world and always have been. They were available in Khilafah, available in Islamic government. but he pretends that
He
they're not, and
makes
that these are the unique things to the West, but they're
no,
not.
what
And
he
because
says is
wait a minute,
unique.
because
Mhm.
those things are not the problem, and he's attributing it to those things, to those elements, like for example, the control over legislation and so forth. This isn't a problem if you are a believer, but this is a problem when you're not a believer, and you create a system
Well,
like you
he
created.
made that very clear to me that the reason for the mess we have arrived at, and I believe he published this book in 2011. The reason for the mess we have arrived at, because he lives over here in the mess, is because there is no observance of divine law. There is no unchanging higher moral authority from God.
What
He
we're
makes
saying,
this
yeah,
clear
but
on several occasions.
what we're saying is that never has been, in the West, pre or post Enlightenment. There never has been divine authority. That's what we're saying.
So the way I'm kind of reading into it is we know, so we do know that Kufr is at the foundation of it all, right? Because they don't have, they've never been, it's like he says, they've never been guided by divine law to begin with, right? I think first of all, I think I would have to reread the book 2 and 3 times, to be honest, just to kind of, really get a better grasp on what he's saying.
Sorry. I just imagined the torture. Sorry.
I personally find, you know what? I expanded my vocabulary, is all I'm gonna say. But he's I think so. The way I'm just kind of putting myself in his shoes as someone who's kind of writing this book more than anything else. He might, I don't know, Hallaq. I mean, like, there's always a lot of contemplation about whether this person is or is not going to become a Muslim one day. There's always been theoretical contemplations, debates
I
about.
mean, I don't understand why that's such a big deal.
It's just the way knowledge works, because knowledge is passed on from one empire to the other, whether it was started by the Chinese and the Pharaohs, and then the Greeks and the Romans, the Muslims, and however way you take knowledge, and however way, it always adds on from one to the other. And there are things that are invented by one group of people that's passed on to another group of people, and you take knowledge wherever it comes from. I think it is a lot of theory. It's a lot of theoretical entertainment, in a way, the way I see it. And his I mean, I'm just going to, for example, speak about the bits in chapter 6. I think when he spoke about globalization and consumerism, I think he was quite fair in his assessment, to be honest. I didn't really see anything, well, I didn't see anything that would go completely against what we already know about globalization and consumerism, and how corporation there's this little segment that says about how corporation is created for one purpose, which is to increase wealth and prioritize this purpose above all others, to prioritize wealth and making money, essentially, over social responsibility. And essentially the goal of corporations is to increase profit. There are, like, I can't just kind of negate everything he says because he's not Muslim, right? And he has shed a lot of light about over how the nation state, I suppose, in a Western sense, runs. Maybe he didn't run a very fair comparison to the modern, I want to say, Islamic state. But the modern Islamic state, I mean, I can't say that it's completely flawless either, right? So, it's always, there's always going to be more room to grow and more room to improve. But again, this book is also in 2011, so maybe we're not giving, I feel like a lot has changed since 2011. I feel like a lot has changed since 2011, on a lot of levels, right? Whether it's economically or politically speaking. But yeah, I think I see. So again, I completely see where Wahid is coming from when you live, in Europe or in America or a non-Muslim based country. How shedding light on how Islam ran as a state, well, not state, but as a I'm going to say a state just for the sake of it, and comparing the divine laws that were inspired by Islam to the man-made laws of the modern European or American or Kufr state, let's say. I think I do find it appealing. I think if I were to come from a background I find it appealing as someone who grew up in a society, to be honest, that was very much was very much kind of mind blown and amazed by the West. Like one of the, as someone who grew up in, well, it was, you know, in the Gulf, but in very international schools, let's say, or like predominantly international groups as well. Whether it were Arabs or non-Arabs, a lot of them were very much, what's the word, awe-inspired by Western values, more than you'd think, right? Especially when we're talking about those who come from very liberal backgrounds. Very awe-inspired by Western values, always trying to bring, it's almost like they know better than we do, and this is why they've progressed more than we have. Okay.
Sorry, sister. Just to clarify, they're in awe of Western values or Western value?
So I need clarification of the difference in terms of
Values meaning their beliefs and morals and principles. Value meaning their power and supremacy in the world.
both. So both. So it
And
was values and
sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt.
no, it's fine, it's
Do,
fine.
do they attribute the power and supremacy in the world to their values and their belief system?
Yes, yes. Yes. So what I've seen in these international communities, but I'd say they're more liberal international communities, is that they thought it's because these people have freedom, so-called freedom of expression. It's because their women are free to do whatever they want. They, for some reason, genuinely believe that women there are better off than the women that we had in the Middle East. And of course, I always took a more conservative approach to these then. So things that have to do with just development, you know, in terms of technology and in terms of medicine and in terms of research, because, you know, all the research and all the medicine and all the technology comes from the West, or, you know, or let's say even like Japan or China. So they must be doing something right, and there's something wrong with our backward ways. There's genuinely large groups of Muslims or westernized Muslims, I want to say, who still think and feel that way. And I think this is something that we also need to really work on tackling from the inside. So when you see someone who is a non-Muslim, so I'm coming back to, you know, I'd say 16-year-old, my 16-year-old self, seeing someone as a non-Muslim approaching Islam in this light is very appealing in terms of breaking down some just false preconceptions that we have about them. So I think that makes me see Wahida's point in the way she analyzes the book.
See, this is what you and I were talking about. My wife and I were talking about the other day. This false thing that they put forward, that modernity and liberalism are synonymous. They're interchangeable. So that if you, for example, if you like using technology, then that means you have to subscribe to liberalism, because they make these two things synonymous. Because what's modernity? What do you mean by modernity? What does that even mean? What's the definition of modernity? Obviously, you don't actually mean technology. You mean the so-called Enlightenment values. You mean the Western liberalism and so forth. So then where is the conflict then between the Muslim world and modernity, except if you mean with liberalism? But liberalism and modernity are not the same thing. Modernity is in any era. 100 years ago, it was modernity. In any particular period, it just means now, today, present. What does that have to do with liberalism? You're making it like by implication, liberalism is today and everything else is yesterday. Every other way of being, every other way of thinking, every other philosophy, every other belief system is yesterday, is old, is antiquated. But who said that you get to call modernity and whatever is modern your belief system? Why? It doesn't make sense. But we accept it, we believe it, so that we think now, well, Islam then, therefore, and Muslim values and so forth can't be compatible with modernity, because today modernity is interchangeable with liberalism, with Western liberalism. That's a trick. That's a linguistic trick.
Okay, just back to Talaq. I just want to point out that the contradiction I found was him pointing out that this the trajectory of, I mean, all of the outcomes of globalization, like, you know, McDonald's and fast food and the whole cultural influence aside, he tried to point out that globalization was now taking over nation states, such that the sovereignty that it had is lost. He mentions that. So I thought he was onto something. He was going to talk about private corporate wealth that is anational, that does not care about America, UK. I mean, there's actual third worldization of America that has taken place. It's not a recent phenomenon.
Yeah, I remember reading that paragraph. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then he goes on to say that, but still, he doesn't. He contradicts himself in another section, claiming that, well, the nation states still have the power. Like, I feel that he's confused in trying to bring his point, and then it's just abruptly it ends there. It was just unsatisfactory for me because, again, based off of that Arabic language interview that I mentioned, I had seen, I had hoped that he would have covered a lot more in depth about globalization, besides the things, the cultural impact that it has had on us. And then about the besotment of the West by a segment of people. I don't think that answers why that's an answer, or that's a response to the book. I mean, in the book, he's blatantly claiming that because of the nature of the modern state, therefore, Muslims have abandoned Sharia without actually validating or backing his claims, except that, according to him, based off of that 1826, for whatever reasons, he marks that point. And I know why he says that, but specifically 1826, why? You need to dig further into that interview. But it has no basis on Western Enlightenment values. There's a reason why he's going into that direction. And it's baseless because Muslim history before that operated the same way. We've always interacted with modernity, and we've always practiced ijtihad. We have always tried to negotiate with what's taking place on the ground with our religious texts. We have fiqh. Fiqh is not religiously mandated. It's not cast in stone. It's not what's that word I'm looking for? It's not binding.
Islam is always modern.
Yes, Islam is a modern religion. I want to emphasize, I can't emphasize this enough. It is a modern religion. It's always been, and we don't change with.
Yeah, and fiqh changes with the times. It changes with the circumstances and the situation. It's always responsive.
Yes,
The
and
Sharia doesn't change,
It
but
is
fiqh and
man-made.
ijtihad changes.
Yeah. And it is part of the framework of Sharia. You cannot just, because you must be so isolated and away from Muslim history and Muslim application of the law in order for you to claim that it's absent, or you're just insisting on it for some reason. I don't know what his goal is in insisting on it, because it just seems pretentious, because history is out there. It's just blatant. I don't understand why he's first of all insisting on a timeline, and it's not a real timeline. We've never had the Dark Ages. We never had this conflict with, again, interacting with changing modernity. I mean, changing society. I mean, with change, we never had this conflict. We always had a way to negotiate with our lawmaking, with Sharia at its epicenter. It's always been, even today. To claim that, for example, that Malaysia is now therefore not an Islamic state because it's not the way, I don't know, you imagine it should be because of what, pre-Enlightenment Europe. That's just, it's absurd. It just doesn't make any sense to me that you would insist on that when in reality it's completely, people in Malaysia are not looking up to the West and thinking that the Western, the West is great, or that's the way to aspire to. And even then, I mean, one's misguided aspirations to a kaum or a society or community, it doesn't explain the formation of the nation state as, to contribute to this, because we've also had, back in the day, we've looked up to other different communities. We've always looked up to different communities for its values. We've looked up to the Persians for a lot of the things that they have contributed to civilization.
I see what you mean. I do feel like generally in Far East Asia and in Malaysia, I've been there a few times. There's always, people there have a much higher sense of pride in everything that they've done so far, as a country, as a nation, and they have every right to. I think I think in the Middle East, people have been a lot more affected by colonialism. It's just kind of there's generational trauma, I want to say, that's kind of passed on, in which people are very, very, it's like whether it comes to learning English as a second language, whether it comes to pursuing your degree in a European country or or in America, whether it comes to little just things about, for example, hijab or how you dress or how you present yourself. There's always, up until this day, we do have remnants of being, I want to say, intellectually occupied in a way. I think it has become better over the past decade. I think especially with the way, the Gulf is economically prospering at a very fast rate. But there are still remnants of that in countries, well, I wouldn't say the Gulf, but outside, beyond the Gulf. So I think, yeah.
All right.
It might.
I mean, I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting that this is why I asked about if they attribute the power and supremacy of the West to their values and principles and so on, because when you connect liberalism with modernity, and modernity actually just means, like I said, whatever is modern, whatever is present in the world today, meaning mostly like the technology and so forth. When you connect that with liberalism, then actually what they're doing is, again, making a materialistic argument in favor of their values and their supremacy. They're saying liberalism is better because we have iPhones. It comes down to something like this. They're saying liberalism is supreme because we have all of these nice things. It's still the same thing of a materialistic argument. And they've fooled us into believing that, rather than just saying, well, okay, you made nice things, but that doesn't mean that your philosophies make any sense at all. Because what the purpose that philosophy and belief systems and so on and values, the purpose that is supposed to serve is to make you a civilized society. It's supposed to make you decent people, moral people, and so forth. And it has completely failed to do that. Your belief system has completely failed to do that. However, yes, you've been very productive materially.
They believe the issue is they believe that they're a moral society. They actually think that they are. Well, I think everything, again, for the past, since October, people they've developed insight and there's this wave of awareness. But before that, they genuinely believe that they're a moral society. They things such as abortion laws, or things such as certain the fact that they've got a central a central security or like police system, for example, like that brings order to people. They think that again, a lot of it has to do with just feminism, I suppose, and women and whatnot. That's where a lot of it comes from, and completely ignoring a lot.
But don't you think that these attitudes are primarily held by a certain class of people?
I'd say high middle class and above.
Right.
Higher middle class and above, definitely more than
just like Sister Wahida was talking about, the African immigrants who are allowed into the U.S., as she said, are already from the elite of their own societies.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this figures. You're indoctrinated. You're propagandized. You were the class that was the collaborator class with the colonizers. So of course this is the side that you fall on. But I don't think that the general public in the Muslim world or the global South generally feels that way.
I think like okay, maybe some to illustrate something where Dala was talking about. Okay, I know this is not what she brought up, but like say slavery, the way we talk about slavery. Okay, like okay, so the West would say, okay, we used to do that. It was in the past. We don't do that anymore. So we okay, I see a problem because they have taken on this framework, right? So what do we do? If we don't know any better, we would go, oh, okay, yeah, that was bad. We shouldn't have done it. It guilt trips us into accepting their paradigm. But if you know any better, you would know, heck no, the way we did slavery was completely alien and different, not at all identical to the way you practiced it. So this is something that needs to be understood. And Wael's book is trying to impose a kind of a disconnect with that, like I have to accept, I have to believe that I have to accept that because of the nation state, therefore my conception of my own history is now corrupted. It's not. Why is it not corrupted? Because I know my history. It becomes corrupted if you don't know your history. That's what I'm trying to drive at here I mean, if I were to talk to Wael, this is what I would say to him. You can't tell me that this is who I am, because this is not who I am. You insist that this is who I am because of certain conceptions about me, and you don't know me. And this is where I have a contention. You're not Muslim. Like I illustrated on the point about slavery. You know, it's a very good example, because you can say now, like, someone who's actually ignorant about Muslim history would actually go along with Hallaq and say, yeah, you know, it's wrong. You know, we shouldn't feel that way, because we feel this way because modern state. That's not it. It's because you don't know your religion. You don't know your history. That's why. You know, there are people who have not been affected by these, by the malaise of the modern state. You know, say I acknowledge, okay, so the modern state is an extension of colonialism. Okay, they just found a way to remotely colonize the rest of the world, and they have devised this economic model, economic system to control the rest of the world. Fine, that's okay. That's a thing. And Muslims have understood that, and they have used the Sharia as its epicenter to negotiate with the realities on the ground to live as Muslims. We've always done that. We've always done that.
And
No, I think I agree with you, Sister Salman. I think I agree with Ustad Shahid.
That's what he
I
wrote.
think on that
He
point
said
that
the Sharia was still alive in the people, that the people had never given up the Sharia. That's literally what he wrote. And I just don't see how your personal experience as a person from your background in the country you live in the country you were born in, how that negates my experience in the country I live in the country I was born in. Hallaq is a humanities professor. He's not an economics professor. So he wrote a book about what he has seen amongst the elites of the Muslims who come over, get their degrees, remain and teach here, and what he has seen amongst the bulk of the Muslims who immigrate here. And he looked at the condition of those people. He looked at the background of the system we live under, critiqued it correctly, that it was due to the lack of an unchanging divine law, that this system doesn't even acknowledge such a thing, and that as such, it was doomed to failure at the outset.
Correct.
And
what
that
they
it
do-
is not correctable, and it's a warning to Muslims to not go in the streets of their own nations screaming for
sorry.
democracy. That's what I got out of it.
Sorry, if I may interject. Sorry about this as well. I feel like that all of us are basically converging on the same point, just a bit of in a different way and just using different words. That's how I feel, to be honest. I think what you're saying and what Sister Solma is saying is not really not really against each other at all, I think. What I think is that perhaps Sister Solma is pointing out the fact that obviously there is a huge influence of Sharia still in the Muslim society, and nobody can deny that. Even Hallaq, I think in this book, has said that the 5 pillars of Islam has remained mostly untouched and unchanged. I think he himself has in this book. I think where I believe all of us probably will disagree with Hallaq is his assessment of how much capacity we have to change that nation state system at the moment. I mean, we can all differ over the different definitions of different words like modernity. I mean, the way Sister Salma and Sister Shahid is describing modernity as just whatever is current at the moment. I don't think this is exactly what Hallaq was indicating in his book. He was sort of
No,
using
he
it as
was
a term.
using the
Yeah, he was using it
formal
as a term for
definitions that they
enlightenment
use
and
in the
Kant and everything.
humanities. And he said that at the outset. You
Yeah,
know, the
but
formal definitions of the words nation state, modernity, enlightenment, this is what he was using. He wasn't using
yeah,
the common usage of everyday people. So I fault him
no,
for that because he should
yeah.
have repeated it more
Yeah.
in the book.
Yeah, that is absolutely fine. And I'm sure that we can all have some different understandings of different points. But at the end of the day, what I feel is that we probably will not agree with Halak on the point that he eventually made, in a sense. Or maybe we'll agree, I'm not sure. I'll just give my point of view. That is, when he's saying this is an impossible state, when he's saying this is impossible for Islam to have a modern state, I think many of like Sister Salman Shahid, I think, and even on myself, when I'm objecting to it, what I'm objecting to is basically is I think chapter 6 is the weakest chapter in his book. Chapter 7 is the strongest and the most impressive, in my opinion. And I disagree with chapter 7 most strongly. So the thing is, I think what he's getting at eventually is that the modern state is such in the aftermath of colonization and continuing globalization and everything, is that it is something that we cannot really change in the mold of Islam and Sharia. We cannot do it. He has given many occasions and aspects and things where the pre-modern Islam was different from the modern state and all that. But his conclusion is that we cannot change it. We cannot do it. And that's the conclusion that he draws in chapter 6, that because of globalization, the system is such that he's not hopeful that we'll be able to change these aspects, change these 5 aspects of modern state, and come to realize the 9 points that he mentions in the beginning of chapter 6, which will signify that this is the paradigm of Sharia in his mind, the way he's explaining things. And he thinks that it is not going to happen. That's what I got from his book. And I think on this point, I'm absolutely of the same opinion as Sister Salma and Mr. Shahid, that we do have capacity to eventually turn the tide and eventually make. I mean, we can disagree on it. Someone can think that we still have it in full force. I don't think we have it in full force at the moment, but I do think that it is something that we can re-establish in the sense that the Sharia concerns are truly not essential concerns when the government of Bangladesh is making its policies. That's as much as I can tell. Yes, there is a room that nobody's violating. The government of Bangladesh knows better than to violate. We directly form laws against what most of the people believe, but they don't really make it a primary concern when they're making all the different rules and regulations that is basically running the country in everyday life. And I don't know how much of this was true in the pre-modern Islam. I don't know how much of it was true.
You have
From
to get
what I've
yourself
got
familiar.
from my ulama, it seemed like the most of the everyday rulings. And so I'm just saying that I think this might vary from country to country. Maybe in Malaysia, most of it is still with the Sharia concern in the forefront. I think in most of the Muslim countries in subcontinent, in other parts, probably that's not true. It's more like a background area which is sort of like Christianity in a sense. Like they're not gonna mess around with that. It's like a public sphere, and this is like a private sphere, and this private sphere things we're not gonna mess about. So let the Muslims do whatever they do, kind of like that. So that's I think true for many of the Muslim countries. But where I differ with Halak is that I think that we have the power to overturn this, and chapter 7 is the strongest chapter in his book because 6 is the weakest, because in all the previous chapters he wasn't really saying anything like hypothetical. He was just basically quoting the history the way he sees it, whether he's right or wrong. Chapter 6 is basically saying there is this new thing, globalization, and nobody has ever faced this before. And to face that and to establish the 9 points that he starts in the beginning of the chapter, like these will be the hallmarks of a paradigmatic Islamic government system. He says that Muslim governments will have to do this and that and all that, and everything is government centered, like how to vet the culture, how to vet or censor the different things. And I'm telling to myself,
Muted yourself.
government, sorry about that, how governments didn't need to be involved, and how the society itself was regulating and facing all kinds of challenges in the Islamic society. And now there's this new thing, globalization, and he's thinking that we need the government to sort this problem. Why can't we do it with the society? We still have the society, we still have the individuals. So that's what I thought. And then yeah, we can do it like the way we did before, like we built from the from the ground upwards. And that's something I think the Westerners can't really appreciate, to be honest. Although Hallaq has done a good job of quoting, in my opinion, the different theories, but he didn't really appreciate that. I think the potential of it. So that's just my take, really. Thank you so much.
I don't know. I finished the book and I'm still like, what does he want from me, right? Like, what is he trying, to convey, right? Like that the West is bad. Yeah, we all know that. Cool. Okay, what else, right? Like, and exactly like it's not a problem of, nation state, right? Like, look at Andalus, right? And what Christians did to Muslims, right? Like, what is the difference, right? It was the same, it was a completely different, like maybe establishment somehow, it wasn't this legislative, judiciary, the separation of powers that they claim. It was like feudalism, and it was still the same approach, right? To morality, same approach to everything like that. Like, could you have imagined that, I don't know, feudal France would adopt like Islamic Sharia? Like, is there, I don't know. But could a kingdom, accept Sharia? Yeah, it could, right? It's not about, the model that was present, but it was just about the people who were here and who are there, right? Like it's, yeah, that was my, and also I think like people who have been, like somehow hurt by the West are his exact targets, right? So, it's like the red pill for men, right? Because they've been hurt by women. So, they subscribe to anything, the red pillers say. And I feel it's very similar here because, someone has been hurt by the West or sees the negatives, then essentially they accept everything that anyone who hates the West says, right? Like, even though they are coming from a completely different place with different assumptions, it doesn't make sense for us Muslims to, take anything from it. Like, if you need advice from non-Muslims, then you need more help than you realize, right? It's the name of the video. Yeah, exactly. It's the same with these stuff, right? Like, well, is bin Salman gonna read this book and be like, "Oh shit, I had it all wrong," Like, what is he expecting? I don't know. Or like for us people to be like, yeah, let's revolt, right? And what do you want? What is the goal of this book? What is your purpose, bro?
Really, I share the same sentiment. And again, you cannot impose or guilt trip me on, say again, the example I can think of is slavery. You can't make me think the way modern people think about slavery. It's because our experience is that it's completely different. It's not the same. We don't have the same history. You were brutal. You were horrible. You've always been horrible. Before modernity and after modernity, you never changed. You were never, the West never had God in its center, in its centrality, post or pre-enlightenment. It was, the theocracy is all about control. It just moved from one form of control to the next. And there was no such, we don't have clergy in Islam for Muslims. We don't have like the priesthood. We don't have that. It's again, our experience and our experience with religion is completely different. And to imagine that it's the same, or to talk about it like it's that we share anything, is just absurd. So to make a comparison is really, I find it very absurd. And that I have to, because I'm reading his book, I have to go along with it. I refuse to. I don't, I refuse to go along with his. Yes, Rahim.
On this point, if I may push back a little bit,
Yeah.
I think the Ustad Shahid was also asking about what would be the practical thing that we got out of this book. One thing for myself, I can say, what I think that might be useful for myself, is that like this example of slavery. Previously, the way I have seen different Muslim scholars or the YouTube guys address these sort of questions, I have basically found like two kind of approaches. One is to point out that your thing is not my thing, kind of the way you were explaining, Salma. Like, your slavery is not the same as my slavery. It's very different. Your clergy is not my clergy. Our experience is very different. That was one way that I've seen these sort of oral questions between the two approaches being addressed. And the other way I have seen is sort of like, I don't know if you're familiar with Muhammad Hijab and that kind of personnel, who sort of basically point towards the moral relativism. Like, whenever a moral question is posed at the Muslims, their kind of response is to say, well, how is it to say that your standard of morality is the correct standard? And it's sort of
In Fahim.
No, you didn't mute this stuff.
sort of was correct. And sorry about that. So I think Hallaq, in my opinion, has got a. I haven't come across this approach before, and I find it quite useful. I think what he did was sort of take the underlying value that the West is trying to achieve, and then sort of take and compare the whole society in the entirety of it, and then compare between the two, not just the single points. For example, let's say slavery. What would be the underlying point that the West is trying to point at? That they're the champions of individual freedom? Is that what they're trying to say? If that's what they're trying to say, then another way to approach this would be, let's say, this is the value that we're going to compare between the two civilizations, and then take a look at it, like at how much the West has actually been able to achieve in terms of individual freedom, and how much the Muslims were able to achieve before the modernity set in and started contaminating our societies as well. And that's how I think he has approached on different values and different points. And I think that is quite a useful way, because it's not just one point, is it? Slavery, what does it mean in the overall context of the society, and how much individual freedom did they enjoy, and how much individual freedom have they ever managed to enjoy?
You'll be
And
surprised
yeah,
at the immense.
I personally think that the I was thinking about this. I think the freedom to form a community is the ultimate expression of individual freedom. I mean, that's a. I mean, we all have different opinions, and we come together, and then we form kind of community with all the side. Everybody's agreeing to part of that community.
All right. Let's try to close
And
everybody.
if the West they're stopping.
I'm sorry.
Is another different point. They
I'm
were
sorry.
actually.
Fahim, there appears to be a hiccup on the audio on your side. I'd love to go on, but I have children who need me to put them to sleep. So
Assalamu alaikum. I will just conclude by saying that Muslims who live in the West are, I believe, the most challenged Muslims, because we live in societies which are fundamentally hostile to our basic belief systems. Hence, those of us who remain Muslim are very, very strong Muslims. You cannot be a weak Muslim and survive as a Muslim in these societies. So we are not lesser Muslims. Our experiences are not lesser experiences. And we have our own particular difficulties because we live in a racially, because these people still believe there's such a thing as races of man. We live in a racially hostile environment, and we live in an environment that is hostile to us practicing our way of life. So we're not weak, we're not stupid, because you cannot be either and survive being an adult Muslim in these societies.
all right. Thank you, Sister Wahida. I would like to just, before closing, just paraphrase something that Hallaq has written on chapter 7. He claims that the Sharia and Islamic governance should regulate all human behavior based on the 5 pillars of Islam. So in doing so, how do you do that? He also suggests that all non-pillar elements, okay, all outside of the 5 pillars of Islam, right, that it be subject and conform to the 5 pillars. So you regulate human behavior based on establishing these 5 pillars. So this is what he's saying, that he's suggesting as a solution for his readers. But what I'm saying is that it exists. It is not non-existent.
Yeah, and also just to add, like I just had one from like this whole 2 chapters. I highlighted one part that I was like, yeah, he wrote like, if the modern state, as so many analysts tell us, must itself compete with and readjust under the pressure of globalization, and Islamic governance would suffer multiple and incremental challenges that will quite likely cause its decline and as likely total collapse. I'm like, yeah, okay, cool. That was just
Sharia,
this way how he sees it.
exactly what Sharia, I mean, all Muslim countries have Sharia.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So,
what are you talking about?
you know, you cannot claim based on, you know, some of the characteristics you've listed that therefore we're not Muslim. It's just blatantly, I mean, again, it's false and it's not been challenged. And he has not also proven, except theories, he has not actually provided any evidence. Any 5 pillars mawjood here, even in Singapore, where the government is not Muslim, it's there. You know, we can practice the 5 pillars with no issues. And like I said, also in the discussion group, recently, about 2 years ago, we've had this, if you're not familiar, I think all of those people from countries that were colonized by the UK would know, Section 377A penalizes men who have sex with other men. Okay, so my country repealed the law. Okay, it doesn't, just because the country repealed the law, it doesn't mean that the Muslims are now therefore going around thinking that, oh, it's okay now for men to have sex with other men. No, it's not a thing that happens. Okay, with us, this is not a thing that can happen unless you are so alienated from your religion. If you're alienated from your religion and your own history, sure, I can see that. I can totally see all of the infections, you know, attacking you. You know, the virus just taking hold of you. I can see that. But again, you have to make a distinction between iman and kufr. That's what I'm saying. And you know, Ustaz is saying, I have children waiting to put them to sleep. Actually, I apologize for the abrupt ending of the discussion, and I would like to thank all of you, all 16 of you, for having showed up for the discussion, and I hope to make the recording available for everyone's perusal. I know I owe you all 2 other recordings. I would try to, I'm trying to edit and cut off the unnecessary portions to make it, you know, a decent size and put it up on the Telegram group. So Jazakallah khair, everybody, for showing up. And I will post also the details of the next discussion on, I'm not giving a poll, I'm not letting you all decide. I'm going to go on with Muslim, on the book on extremism, and it'll be a daily reading. Once again, I will provide the details later. Jazakumullah khairan, everyone. Assalamu alaikum.